Hello and welcome to the Leaders Council podcast with me, Scott Challoner. The podcast, just like the Leaders Council itself, is all about recognising and celebrating those people who keep this country running. We exist to give leaders a voice outside of their own organisation and to support them in the same way they support their staff every single day of the week. If you are in a leadership position yourself and would like to have your voice heard on the national stage, please go to leaderscouncil.co.uk/apply. Joining me on today's programme on a cloudy autumn day here in the capital is Oliver Vaulkhard. Ollie is a director at Vaulkhard Group, a leisure firm with a portfolio of hospitality venues. Ollie, very warm welcome to yourself today, and thank you ever so much for joining us.
It's certainly a cloudy and autumnal day here as well in the northeast.
Yes, it's very much the case, I think, all over the country today. It's not the best weather for this, but at least we're all tucked up inside and it's actually quite warm in comparison. Now, normally at this point in the programme, Ollie, we dive straight into the subject of leadership and really bring that into focus. But considering the ongoing COVID-19 situation, which has really hung over us all like a dark cloud this year, I feel it's appropriate we approach the subject matter from that angle. Reason being is because it's proven to be such a significant challenge for leaders within all walks of life. But for yourself as a businessman with a portfolio of businesses predominantly in the hospitality sector, to what extent has it affected things for you?
I've been in business for 25 years in this city. And obviously seen lots of ups and downs and lots of changes in that time. I've never experienced anything like this. It seems to be an absolute whirlwind that is hitting us from all sides all the time. Some of the greatest challenges in it, beyond the obvious health issues, which everyone is very aware of, but if we're looking specifically in running a business in hospitality, we've been faced with an ever-changing sea state. So at the beginning of this, in April, hospitality was very much seen by the government and the public certainly as an industry that needed protection, and I think we're very, very well looked after, well supported, well cared for at the beginning of this. And we went through that summer with an air of confidence and government support, which culminated obviously in August with Eat Out to Help Out, and that was a real celebration for the industry. Lots of businesses did very well. We reopened, customers embraced us once again. We felt very much that we'd come out of the other side of something which was torrid, albeit we'd survived it. What's happened over the past 6 weeks has been a deterioration both in terms of trade, in terms of weather, in terms of outlook and forecast, but also in the mood music that seems to be coming out of central government. We no longer seem to be the loved industry that we once were, and we seem to be being targeted as the main vector of transmission of the COVID virus, which seems a very different place from where we were and also seems somewhat unjust. And so to try and steer a business through this has been really challenging, but also quite enlightening in views and the way you approach things. There have been very many different business decisions when you all of a sudden are looking at businesses. How can we best lose the least amount of money by opening? Can we open this business just to break even? How do we keep as many staff as possible? These aren't natural things one would think of in business, but these are the conversations and decisions which are happening every day at the moment.
And I can imagine from this experience of crisis management and having to make decisions like this, you've probably actually learned quite a lot during this time, not just about yourself, but also everybody around you too that you work with.
Yeah, I mean, I think people very often talk about their team of people being so important. In February, we employed 280 people. Very sadly, I stand here now and we probably employed less than 100 people. And that's been the greatest challenge for me. I didn't know all of those 280 people, and many of them may not have even known me. But as they've gone and as they've disappeared from the business, we felt weaker and less of what we were. Yes, we still have the buildings and we still have the properties, but we are becoming a shell of what we were, and losing that culture and that group of people who made the business what it is. I always thought the business was me, and I've learned this year it clearly isn't me. It's very little to do with me. And so that's been a really challenging situation. So often in business, you'll think of yourself and your family and your own circumstance. And actually, that's been very much the last thing on my mind throughout this summer and this year. And that's been an interesting turn of events.
And how long do you see the current sort of COVID secure restrictions actually being in place for in hospitality? And the reason why I ask that question is because even a working vaccine, should of course we get one, it's not necessarily going to work as an immediate magic bullet, is it? It's still going to take some time perhaps for people to sort of summon up the courage to go out into hospitality venues and eat around other people again en masse because of the sort of prolonged anxiety this is going to cause and the effect that will have on consumer confidence.
I come at this from a slightly different point of view. Actually, I think in August when we were allowed to reopen, it was an insanely busy month. It felt like December. All of our staff at the end of it were just exhausted. We were all worn out, and there was a real surge and pent up demand from people to go out and embrace hospitality. And I think COVID has a different effect on many people. There are clearly people who are very frightened of it and are concerned for their health, and that may be because they have an underlying health condition or they are of a certain age. But equally so, there's a great swathe of the population which don't have a fear of it and actually resent what is detracting from their lives. And so I think certainly there will be a stream of customers who we will have to spend time building up their confidence once again, and they'll have to build a confidence in the vaccine, and they'll have to build a confidence in medicine. But I think there's also a great stream of customers who are just desperate to go out and socialize and be around people. I think a great thing so many of us have missed during this time is social interaction, whether that be having a pint or going for a meal or having a kick around with a football with your pals in the park, whatever it is. I think we've all missed social interaction probably as much as any other restrictions that we've had. And so I hope that science and medicine will be our savior here. And I think it'll be a combination of things. I think a vaccine clearly at some point is going to make a difference. I think as we learn to medically treat positive cases of COVID so they don't turn into more serious medical events, and I think we will come out of that with the help of science. Now the government are talking about March, April. I don't know if that's simply because that's when the flu season ends, or because they suspect the medical intervention will come in before then, and therefore they can be seen as heroic. I think as a business, we are looking ahead and thinking that we've got to find a way to stagger through the very challenging trading environment at the moment for 6 months. And really we're looking and thinking, okay, where can we be in March or April? And so I hope that things change by then. And I mean, amazingly, at that point, we'd have been a year into this. And if you'd have said to me in Christmas last year, you're going to close for 12 months, in effect, have zero revenue, I would have looked at you and thought, right, well, I won't be in this business anymore. And so to have got as far as we've got is good. To get to April will be a challenge, although I'm confident we will get there. I would like to see some movement, at least by the 1 year anniversary of this.
Let's certainly hope so. And one thing that we might see as well during that time is essentially some of the features of the last few months becoming a permanent part of the way that business works in this country. In a lot of industries, of course, there's already this shift toward remote working, albeit within hospitality that's not possible. But do you think that some of the things that have cropped up in the sector, such as hand sanitizer stations, certain ways of sort of laying out restaurants, do you think that could well be here to stay?
Yeah, I think there are. In every negative situation, there are positives come from it. I think one of the things that a great number of people have embraced is table service. It's something we've always done in our business across a number of our venues, and it's something which is really enjoyed and embraced by customers. Being served at a table is a really nice experience, and I think that will continue. I think enhanced cleaning regimes, enhanced sanitization, it seems to make absolute sense. When all this started to happen in March, so many of my venues are, as I say, 25 years old. I was amazed that we were running out of hot water across all our venues all the time. And it was simply because every person using the toilet were washing their hands. And well, it made me think, this must never have happened before. And so I think things like hand cleaning, cleaning PDQ machines, cleaning tables in a better manner, chairs in a better manner, table service, I think those things will stick and we will be better for it. I really hope masks go away. I think they're a grim thing. I find it sad when we lose interaction with someone's face and smiles and you know, that connection you have with someone without saying words, with just a look. So I hope masks disappear. I like all the outdoor areas that are being built. Obviously, it's a bit chilly at the moment, but I'm looking at customers on the weekend just gone, putting coats on and putting boots on and putting hats on and sitting outside and living in a very different way than they would be used to. And I hope those outdoor areas maintain as well. And so, yes, there will be positives that will come out of this. And obviously, let's hope some of the more negative aspects of it disappear into the annals of history.
Let's certainly hope so. And thinking about what may happen now over the next 12 months, just because I'm conscious that our time on the programme is beginning to draw to its close, Ollie, what do you sort of want in terms of where the business should be in the next year? I mean, what do you really want to have achieved by this time in 12 months? And indeed, where do you see the industry heading in that period of time?
I think I think 12 months has probably two main sectors, main parts to it. I think sadly, for a period of months coming, we're going to see a lot of pain in the industry. We're going to see closures and business failures, and I think we're going to see some pretty horrific unemployment numbers coming out in November as the furlough scheme ends and businesses are simply non-viable. And I think that is going to be a time of real sadness, and that'll be around that Christmas period, which is always such a boom time in our industry. I think that's going to be very sad. And a damaging time for us. By nature, I'm an optimist, and I hope that as we come into the new year and as I've said previously, medicine and science catches up with us, I hope we start to rebuild. I hope we rebuild in positive ways with customers who embrace us with a greater sense of friendship and bonhomie with our fellow man and actually enjoying social environments. And I think we can grow and have a great year. Now, it will take a number of great years to rebuild the balance sheets of many, many businesses within hospitality. We've taken an enormous hit, and certainly a few months of good trade won't do that. But let's hope we'll come into the new year, we can start to rebuild. We can start to rebuild the balance sheets, and we can all start to do what we do best, which is supply good times and good memories and good fun.
Let's really hope so, because it is so important in the wider scheme of things for people's mental health as well. And that's certainly been amplified, the importance of mental health and well-being by this whole pandemic. I certainly wish you all the luck in the world in your endeavours, Ollie. And I actually think, just given how nice it's been having you on the programme with us today, that it would be fantastic to catch up at some point in the next 12 months and have you back on the programme just to see how things are coming along. And I really hope a little bit later on down the line that even though it might be a little bit of a tricky time coming up, there will be some positive news to share at least.
Well, it's certainly something I will look forward to doing, and I've done a lot of stuff about the negatives of COVID, and I do look forward to, as you say, the good stories coming out of it, and a bit of smiles and happiness again. And hey, listen, I want to pay some tax revenues. I'm sick of taking money from the government. I want to start contributing again. It's what I've done for a quarter of a century, and it's what I want to keep doing.
Exactly. Get the income coming in and give to Caesar what belongs to Caesar. Absolutely right. And I love the positivity, Ollie. It's absolutely infectious. And I think we all do need a dose of it during this period of time, because morale isn't necessarily great at the moment, but it's something that can always be changed. And most importantly as well, until we do hopefully get to speak again on the programme, please do take care and stay safe with all that's still going on in the world as well.
You take care too, and look forward to speaking to you soon.
I'd also like to extend that to every single one of the listeners tuning into the programme today. Please do stay well, look after yourselves, and be considerate of others, because it does make such a difference in saving lives. It was a pleasure for me to welcome Oliver Vaulkhard onto today's programme. Coming up next on the show today, we'll be joined by England's 1966 FIFA World Cup hat-trick hero, Sir Geoff Hurst, who will be entering the show. Now, Sir Geoff scored over 200 league goals during his professional career for the likes of West Ham United United and Stoke City, among other clubs. But he remains most well known, of course, for that famous treble in England's 4-2 victory over West Germany back at the old Wembley, which saw England lift the Jules Rimet Trophy, to date their only World Cup, and also made him the only man to this day to have scored a hat-trick in a World Cup final. So Jeff will be coming onto the programme to not just look back at some of those highlights of his career, but also talking about the importance of robust leadership throughout and leaving a message of thanks to our wonderful NHS who've been doing all they can during this most trying time. That is coming up next. And now, ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, we extend a very warm welcome to a special guest in Sir Geoff Hurst, who joins us on the programme today. Sir Geoff, good morning.
Good morning. How are you?
Very good, thank you. It certainly is a wonderful day forward, isn't it?
It is. The weather's pretty good at the moment. I hope may it last.
Absolutely.
After a thunderstorm, it's lovely.
It is certainly after a storm. And speaking of storms, actually, I'd like to start with just a hypothetical scenario. If we fast forward 2 years, Sir Geoff. Let's imagine it's December 2022 and it's the World Cup final and England are there. We could be playing defending champions France, we could be playing the Germans, anybody. And England are 2-0 up in the 90th minute, so victory is all but guaranteed. And Harry Kane, with a brace to his name already, is brought down in the penalty area. So he has the opportunity to make history by emulating yourself and becoming only the second ever player to score a World Cup final hat-trick. Would you honestly want him to bury it, or would you prefer him to fluff his lines?
I'd want him to bury it. I've asked that question. I get that question asked a bit. I've had a good run with this record, and goodness me, it's nearly 60 years, I guess, if we're looking at 2022. No, I'd want him to bury it. A for him, he's a fantastic player, tremendous goal scorer. And if anybody I'd like to repeat what I achieved, it would be someone like Harry, who was a fantastic professional with Spurs and England. So absolutely. And I want England to do well. I mean, I want England to be successful. I'm an England supporter. I'm a football supporter. And I really want the country to do well in anything, in all sports, and particularly in my sport. So I want him to bury it. And I will be as delighted as anybody in the country if he can achieve that. But more importantly, that England have achieved what we achieved all those years ago. And it's important that the team do it as opposed to Harry doing it individually. And that's how I felt about my achievement. It's about the team being successful. Whether I got 2 or 3, in one sense, is I wouldn't say immaterial, but it's about the team winning. It's all about the team.
Mm. Exactly. Consideration of the wider team is a cornerstone of leadership, which is, of course, what the Leaders' Council is all about, recognising that and promoting that for the future. But if we sort of flash back 54 years to that moment in 1966 when you were bearing down on goal, I understand that a lot of people always ask you the question about whether you actually knew there were people on the pitch at the time, and there's quite a bit of a joke about that, but there's something else that I'm actually interested in. I understand, we all know what happened, the ball nestled in the top corner, England won 4-2 and lifted the World Cup, but you've often described that as being a mishit finish sometimes before, haven't you?
Yes, I think people... I recall exactly what's amazing. I can recall exactly what I was thinking at that moment, obviously a crucial moment in the game, towards the end of the game. I knew the game was nearly finished. As the ball came to me initially, I was actually, with my back to goal, I was actually looking at the referee 10 yards from me in the middle of the park, and he was waving, at the whistle in his mouth, but waving play on with both arms, indicating quite clearly, of course, that the game was nearly finished. So when I got to the edge of the box, I'm now thinking the game's nearly finished. I'm thinking, if the game's nearly finished, I'm now going to whack this ball with everything I've got left. I'm thinking if it goes beyond the sand into the crowd, by the time the ball boy gets it back to Hans Stilkowski, the German keeper, by that time, surely the game has got to be over. But as I always jokingly say, I mishit it and it flew in. But I was thinking about wasting time, not so much about, but certainly what I was going to do, which showed I was going to hit it as hard as I possibly could after those 2 hours.
And it just goes to show sometimes that hit and hope, taking a punt, can sometimes be the way forward, because I think it shows that in any form of leadership, be it in sport or in business, you can't go sometimes without taking risks.
Absolutely, yes, absolutely. Yes. I mean, I wasn't in that position with risk in a sense because the game was unfinished, but that philosophy is right. You're just going to, there's an element of risks making it, but there's got to be a control on that risk, not stupid risks in all walks of life. an element of maybe doing something you're not too sure about. But sometimes in life, you've got to have a go. You can't be successful in terms of long-term leadership if you're just always sitting on the fence and not taking any chances. I don't think that's where the great leaders will get to by having that kind of philosophy. You've got to move forward.
And the last time that you actually joined us on the Leaders Council podcast and spoke with my colleague Jonathan White, Sir Jeff, was back in February, of course. And that was a point where we knew a little bit about COVID-19, which was looming, but that was before it really took hold in the UK and really turned our world upside down. And before that, this summer was meant to be all about the England national team once again, who were going to the European Championships. But that's in a way now been replaced by the National Health Service, and we've been supporting the Health Service and applauding their efforts, and we're hanging out thank you banners displaying drawings of rainbows, very much in the same vein that you'd see the George Cross adorning most households during a major tournament year. Do you feel there are parallels between the sense of national unity that we discovered during this time and the spirit of 1966?
Oh, absolutely, particularly the recognition of the NHS with what they're doing, and I think it was a great idea. During that period where they asked everybody to stand outside their houses and clap and congratulate the NHS for what they were going through. And I think it's been criticism in the past, of course, the NHS on how it's run, whether there's enough funding for it and so on. But really, when you begin to realise during these turbulent times how absolutely vital and important it is to have a health service that works efficiently, and to see individually the amount of people who are interviewed almost every day on the terrible circumstances they were having to work under with masks and so on. And also into what was also, for me, fantastic, all these people from different countries all over the world that were working in our country with the same union to be successful and help people to survive COVID. Very heartwarming. And I think that kind of feeling, I probably, as a player in 66, I probably wasn't aware at that time of the unity of the country. I've learned that over the years when I talk to people who were about 66, and they will tell you what a great day it was and where they were, remembered exactly what they were doing and the fantastic stories. So that identified then as that great unification of the country, 30 million plus viewers, the biggest TV viewing audience we've had. So today, it's certainly through this pandemic, and the NHS has been absolutely magnificent, and every single person, some very fantastic and heartwarming stories of how they're dealing with this unbelievably difficult situation from a health perspective. Fantastic. So that was really heartwarming to get out and cheer and clap on the balcony for the NHS. Fantastic.
Certainly inspiring what we've been seeing from the front line as well. And flashing back just to 1966 again, just from a leadership point of view, the manager that made all of that possible and oversaw yourself and your teammates on the road to the World Cup was, of course, Sir Alf Ramsey. What sets somebody like him or Ron Greenwood apart from other coaches? Because I understand that both men had a profound impact on you, not just as a player, but also as a person as well.
Well, I think that I was very fortunate. You're talking about coincidence and fortunate in your life to be at the time when I was physically at my best during those years. Born earlier or later, I wouldn't have been around physically enough, clever enough, technically good enough to be around, to be a good player. But at that time, I'm involved with arguably the greatest coach we've seen in this country, Harry Redknapp, who's been around a long time, would still say he is the best coach he has worked with. And that's 50 years Harry's been in the business plus. And then moving on to having a national level, a great manager. And the two coincided in a sense because Ron Greenwood always said that and felt that he, as a coach of a League One club, or Premier League as it is today, it's important you prepare and teach and coach the players to be prepared to be playing in the best company, playing for England. And so he prepared us to be playing for England. And then Alf Ramsey knew the players to pick. Discipline was his big skill, making sure those players were disciplined in the right formation. So the two combined moving from one to the other. How can you possibly be as fortunate as I was? It was just amazing. So I think I think there are two different aspects of football in terms of leadership. You've got a coach who's a team coach who's a teacher effectively. Then you've got the other kind of character who's a manager who manages people. May not be quite so good technically on the coaching aspects, but by that stage, Ron Green was passing a coach person to Alf, who then managed from a discipline point of view, because you're managing people from the whole country. You're not just managing a club. You're managing people, different characters, and all over the country is slightly more demanding job in that respect. So you've got to hone that lot of all over, different characters, strengths, players, into a unit to play for, to represent England. So Alf Ramsey was very good at that. His discipline was fantastic. So the combination of the two, you can say I can't be I'm so blessed to be as fortunate as I was to come across these two fantastic people in my life, in my football life.
And I suppose for every Sir Alf Ramsey and Ron Greenwood as well that you have worked with, there are also coaches out there that one might work with that perhaps might not get the best out of players during their, of course, their peak. But just as much as you can learn from, of course, coaches that do get the best out of players, you can learn as much from less effective leaders as you can from good ones as well, because that experience can ultimately mould you as a person, can't it?
Oh yes, I think leadership's important and coaching and teaching is important. And the great teachers and coaches and managers have that skill. Sometimes it's an innate skill in management. They have it. But I think you can learn, if you're sensible enough, to learn from people who are teaching you or coaching you. It's not the right way to go about teaching you or coaching or managing you. You can learn from that. If you're a player, you can learn what you think is a good coach and what you think is a good manager, which you can take into your career after playing into coaching or management. So you can learn as much from people make mistakes. You can learn also from making your own mistakes. You can do something in the past that think, well, that was a really stupid thing to do, and I'll make sure I'm not going to do that again. And it is important in all sorts of life. You learn from your mistakes. People will make mistakes. Young people will make mistakes. But it's learning. It's the silly people who make mistakes and don't learn from it, continues making those same mistakes throughout their life and becoming maybe unsuccessful throughout their careers.
Completely understand exactly where you're coming from. I think it's almost impossible to become an effective leader in our profession without having that learning curve of making mistakes and learning from them exactly. During your conversation with Jonathan back in February, Sir Geoff, I know that you and him discussed at length some of the big inspirations and influences on you throughout your career and throughout adulthood. But I understand that your love for football and obsession with the sport actually started a lot earlier, even if you were toing and fro between football and cricket somewhat at the time. I read somewhere that during your teenage years, you were once fined £1 for disturbing the peace after consistently kicking a football into a neighbour's garden. Is that true?
Not many people know that, as the saying goes. Yeah, that's absolutely true. In those medieval days, you weren't football pitches or place very rarely where you could play. You in our road in Greenways, it was called in Chelmsford. We that 3 or 4 lads lived quite close to it. It's a cul-de-sac. It's not a big long road with a circle at the bottom. So there wasn't a great deal of traffic anyway. A, because it was a cul-de-sac, and B, because there weren't as many cars. No, there weren't as many cars in those days. So we played across the road, and you used to have to learn to chip the ball above the pavement to hit the goal at the back. The goal was about a 2 foot wide semicircular where a tree was planted. That was the goal, and so as the 3 of us play football. But amongst those houses where we lived and played, there was a family and a boy that didn't play football. I think he was interested in flying, and making balsa wood gliders. And nice guy, but just didn't play football. And on this particular garden, of course, occasionally the ball finished up there. And crazily enough, they took us to court, and we actually got fined. This is absolutely true. We got fined £1 for kicking the ball in the neighbour's garden. That's astounding when you think about it, isn't it? And when there's nowhere else to play apart from the street, and we were actually. But that happens. That happens. You'll hear stories. We see stories of neighbours falling out over different things. You see those stories every day. But that was certainly a true story. Absolutely true.
And during that time, who was it during childhood that you really looked up to, that you thought was an inspiration to you and made you really think that going into professional sport was going to be the route for you?
Well, my father was obviously the biggest inspiration for me because he was an ex-player. He played lower down for Oldham, Rochdale. We actually moved south from Manchester. I was born in Ashton-under-Lyne. We actually moved south to Chelmsford when I was I was the eldest of three, when I was probably about 7 or 8, into this particular street called Greenways. And what he did with me, I think, was had a big influence, going back to that third goal in the World Cup, in many years in the back garden. And when we moved up market to a council house, somewhere in Chelmsford, and he would have me in the back garden teaching me to kick with my left foot. And so at that time, and even today, you don't see that many players that are completely two-footed, and I was. Maybe not as two-footed as Bobby Charlton. Even Jack Charlton, his brother, didn't know which was his best foot. He was fantastic. But I was pretty two-footed. And a lot of the hat-tricks I scored were one right, one left, and a header. So he had a huge influence. I wasn't a child, although I had a footballing father. I wasn't a child whose father pushed him into being a footballer. And what happened with my story is a friend of my father, I know the guy's name, called Jock Redfern, unbeknownst to me, he wrote to two clubs for a trial. He wrote to Arsenal and he wrote to West Ham United when I was just after school leaving age. West Ham replied. They asked me to come for a trial. I went for a trial with them, and they saw something in me and took me on what was called the ground staff then, almost at school leaving age. And so I wasn't necessarily thinking I've got to go into football. It's just that that's how it happened. Although I enjoyed football and I was reasonably good, there was no big focus on me as a great schoolboy player. Nobody was scouting me or writing to my parents saying, come and have a trial at this club or that club. But a friend of my father wrote the letter. So that's how it happened. The problem I had during those early years, I enjoyed cricket as well. And I was messing about, as I kindly put it, between the two sports, which was hugely detrimental to me in my early development, either as a cricketer or either as a footballer. And it wasn't until Ron Greenwood miraculously tried me. I was a midfield player then, or centre half at school. He said, I'm going to try you up front. He put me up front in a game, and then my whole football career and life changed dramatically.
And I suppose as well, what might have also done it for football as opposed to cricket was that fateful match for Essex over in Aigburth against Lancashire, wasn't it?
Yes, a lot of people know that. One game, the sort of went messing about, but between the two, I had one first-class game for Essex, as you said, Aigburth in Liverpool. And I think I got naught and naught not out, I think. We won the game, funny enough. I thought a couple of catches, but Essex actually won the game, v Lancashire up in their territory. But that was a real problem for me. I think I could have done some advice maybe earlier to say, make your mind up. But when you look back, even today, cricket goes through till, September, whereas football starts in July, so there's a huge overlap. And I'm still playing cricket until September, missing pre-season, early games for those 2 or 3 years, extremely detrimental to me doing well at one or the other. Until Ron Greenwood just put me up front, and that was it. And from a standing start, I think my first season, around September, October, I played my first game up front against Liverpool, and I think I played about 23, 24 games, 27, 28 games, and scored 14 goals, like 1 in 2 from a standing start for a midfield player. So quite changed dramatically. That was 60, 62, 63 season, 3 years before the World Cup.
And when we think about leadership in football, the role of a goalkeeper, of course not related to your own career, is to essentially build from the back and command this penalty area. And one goalkeeper that you played with, not just for England, but also for Stoke City in the later years in your career, was Gordon Banks. I have to confess, as a boyhood Port Vale supporter, I am relieved that incredible talents like yourself and Gordon are no longer occupying the dressing room there. And I did have the fortune of meeting Gordon when I was a young boy as well. But what was Gordon like as a leader on the field?
Well, first of all, he was a great. Two things for Gordon. He was a great keeper. I would still say the greatest English keeper we've ever had, and one of the best keepers in the world. Absolutely fantastic. Funnily enough, I didn't realise. It's funny how you look at. I see when Gordon passed away, naturally, sadly, a few months ago, and obviously it's showing a lot of videos of Banksy, programs about Banksy and the great saves he made and the save against Pele and so on. But I didn't realise how athletic he was, how quick he was, athletic, springing forward to smother balls, and not just hitting balls out. Agility-wise, he was absolutely fantastic. But as a character, he was a joker. He was a very kind, very mild-mannered, lovely man, the nicest guy you can possibly wish to meet. But he was a joker. He always had a joke for you. Every time you met, sometime he'd have a new joke. And people talk about him and who are close to him and remember what a joker he was. And they're the two things that really stick out for Banksy. And we were very lucky, of course, to have that kind of. And you need that kind of quality as a world-class player when you win a World Cup. You need 4 or 5 players, which we were very fortunate to have in our team. Banksy is one of the world-class players, along with Bobby Moore and Bobby Charlton. Jimmy Greaves, who didn't play, was a world-class player put in the squad, and Ray Wilson, our left back, I'd always argue was a world-class player. So you need that kind of quality initially if you're going to be successful in winning a World Cup. Some world-class players, and Banksy was up there, not with the best for me.
And another thing from during your days at Stoke City as well was that a talented but then troubled young midfielder by the name of Alan Hudson first joined the club around the early 70s. And I know that you were asked to take him in as a lodger to provide him with a stable home during his spell there by then manager Tony Waddington. Now, I've spoken to a great many directors and executives on this programme before, and all of them describe trust as being a key cornerstone of leadership. How did it feel for you knowing that Waddington trusted you to that degree to ask that of you?
Well, I was extremely flattered. It was a huge compliment that he saw me as and of course over the years, hopefully that had come out. That's important that you have those kind of qualities as a player that A, he saw when I was at West Ham, and B, obviously acquired me to play at Stoke City. So I was initially first fairly surprised, I think and certainly my wife was fairly surprised when I said I need her permission for me to allow Alan Hudson to stay with us in those early periods. But what he saw, of course, in me was, which is, I can see in myself, I was a very disciplined person, a very disciplined player, which you have to be. I didn't really have, I would say, the qualities of the world-class players like the Bobby Charltons and the Jimmy Greaves and the Bobby Moores. So you need to bring all the other characteristics to be successful at that level, to compete in their level. And discipline was one of them. And obviously Tony Waddington saw that. And if he wanted to he trusted me that I was disciplined enough to hopefully push some of my discipline into Alan Hudson, which we did. And in those early 6 months and couple of years, he was come up a bit heavy from Chelsea. He lost a bit of weight. And although he was a little bit indisciplined himself, hence they needed him to stay with me, what he was a fantastic player. He is one of the most fantastic players I think I've come across, but not hit the best because I think he was certain slightly bit of ill discipline within his general life. And you need at the top, and I'm talking at the top being an England player, but I'd compare him purely on ability, compare with ability, up in the France Beckenbauer mould, without any shadow of a doubt. He was that good. So it was a bit of fun and enjoyable times. Serving Alan Hudson the cups of tea about 8 o'clock at night when we had our tea at our home for those few months. And I think it was a big help to getting Alan back on track and performing brilliantly for the club.
And following on from your days with the Potters, you went on, of course, to play football in Ireland and the United States before the end of your career. Did you feel that the dressing room and indeed leadership culture at those clubs differed from perhaps what you'd been used to back in England?
Well, I think Ireland was just a still spell with Cork Celtic, so it's hard to judge and make any comparisons. And of course, in America, it was the early days of football in America, and I thoroughly enjoyed my time at Seattle. So it's difficult to make a comparison. I think I was fortunate at West Ham. It was a great time with the club, and I was fortunate to play with Stoke City for 3 years, and it was a fantastic time for that particular club. They won, of course, the League Cup before I went there. Sadly, they knocked us out in the semi-final. So it was a marvellous time for that particular club, and very close. I think we played Ajax in the following year in Europe. I think we only lost on a goal over the 2 games against Ajax. So it was a great time for the club. So I'm very fortunate to have played for those 2 clubs. Only a short spell at West Brom, of course, but I think, as I always jokingly say, I think I was past my sell-by date then. West Brom was a fantastic club, but I wasn't at my best, and I felt it was time to retire, which I did. And Johnny Giles was in charge then. I think West Brom actually got up that year, but I made very little contribution to that success the club had. So, yes, the American experience was just fantastic. I never saw it as long-term being over there. That was a brilliant few months with my wife and 2 daughters, and my wife actually was pregnant with her 3rd daughter over there. So they were good times. Completely different. Ireland was just I always joke about Ireland. I was there for about, I think, a month, I think it was, and I enjoyed the experience, and I earned a few quid, and I think it paid for the kitchen in one of my houses back in England. New kitchen.
So it certainly went really well. I suppose in the waning days of your career, was it humbling that you realised that people were beginning to actually look up to you and be inspired by you as a legend, as in perhaps the same way that you were looking to the likes of Bobby Moore earlier on in your career?
Yes, I think that kind of whatever the correct word is, I don't know, being looked at and revered sort of comes maybe longer, not some sort of immediately after you finish playing, but in the long term when and I always joke when people introduce me either to other people or introduce me on stage as a legend, and I always jokingly say you only start being called a legend when you're over 70. And I think the whatever the word is, I'm not sure, adulation or recognition or whatever, it sort of happens and you think more about it, or it happens and occurs more in later years. Not certainly. I felt during the time after I finished playing or managing or playing for England during my football career. And I think I went into business for 20 years. I don't think anybody necessarily looks at me when I was in business as necessarily a legend or somebody they could look up to. I felt that kind of attitude probably has happened in my later years, probably.
For those younger generations, just lastly, Sir Geoff, before we do wrap things up, for people who are aspiring to become leaders in business, politics, sport, or indeed any walk of life, if you could offer any advice to them based upon your experience, what advice would you give them?
Simple advice in a sentence is really, I learned a lot from Alf Ramsey. He was a boss. I think a boss sometimes have natural characteristics. You can learn about management on management courses, but there's certain characteristics when the successful bosses is within them to start with. But one of the things I learned from Alf Ramsey, which I've taken into my business life and even talking to my family life, if they're involved in business, is when you're managing people, you manage them as a group. Anybody that doesn't want to be part of that group, you find is backing against what you want to achieve as a boss, you move them out. And I think that's one of the most simple lessons I learned during the Alf Ramsey period. Even some of the great players I felt should have been in the squad, possibly at the time, without mentioning names. When you hear stories about this player not, completely complying with everything, and they're left out, or they're not even in the squad. And I felt that was, and even some with great ability, I think probably didn't make it. And I think a lot of it stems down to they wanted to be, a lone champion, successful person, didn't want to be part of the group. So that for me is the key message, the single key message I would pass on to anybody who wants to manage a group of people in any walk of life.
Ties in very nicely with a quote from one Nelson Mandela, in fact, that surround yourself with people who are better than you are in some ways. And I think that is incredibly sound advice indeed.
Yes, it is. Very good. Good advice, yes.
So, Jeff, thank you ever so much for joining us on the programme this morning. It's been an absolute pleasure having you with us to discuss your life, career and leadership. And it would be a pleasure to welcome you back on the programme in future to discuss further.
Pleasure. Thank you. Enjoy being part of the programme. Thank you.
Likewise. Thank you ever so much for your time again.
This has been the Leaders Council podcast. Thank you for celebrating excellence in leadership with us. I've been your host, Scott Challoner. Until next time, goodbye.
Thank you for listening to our podcast. The views expressed within the podcast do not reflect the views of the Leaders Council of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, its parent company or subsidiaries, members of staff, or other guests of any other person therein associated.